Welcome to a new edition of South Sound Business Report. Today we'll look at the relationship between city budgets and business. Stay tuned. Hello, I'm Jeff Rouse. Thanks for being with us. This has been a challenging end of the year for municipalities all around the South Sound as they try to work out a two-year budget that's balanced, facing decreased revenues and increasing needs. Nearly two-thirds of Washingtonians live within city limits, and increasingly those cities are unable to afford to deliver all of the services that those residents expect. The city of Tacoma is a good example. In crafting the next two-year budget, the council had to eliminate over 200 city jobs. This is Marty Campbell, a member of Tacoma's City Council, and importantly for this program's theme, a business owner, or at least a former business owner. Tell us about the formation, the foundation. What was it that brought about this municipal funding crisis in Tacoma, per se, that caused so much trouble in creating the next two-year budget?
I think one of the things we had was the way that we collect taxes kind of has a structural issue. We have four sources for where we have revenue that comes in: B&O tax, sales tax, intergovernmental stuff, and property tax.
Okay.
And each one's about a quarter of what we do. And so we had, over the last few years, a drop in property taxes, a drop in sales taxes, extreme drops in that area, and B&O tax. And so what we had was a lot of tax revenue that was dropping.
Wow. Wow. So it wasn't any one event. It wasn't a catastrophic loss. It was systematic and the impact of the weakening economy, really.
Right. And in the long term, year one of the recession, you're able to look at reserves, you're able to make some nips and tucks, and after that, but it's the length of it that has continued to compound itself with decreasing property taxes, decreasing sales taxes over time. Each year keeps getting less than the year before. So,
in your experience, 20 years of business ownership, when sales dropped, the natural reaction for a manager of a business is to cut expenses.
Right. You can either cut expenses or you can raise prices.
Okay.
To keep the cash flow the same.
Is there a corollary in city government?
Well, it's either reduce service to the community or raise taxes. So either we can cut that level of service that we give to our community, or we can shore it up with tax or fee increases. The tack that we took last time was actually a very balanced approach towards our budget, in that we did a lot of cutting of services. Over 200 positions were cut, and 70 of those were layoffs. Rest were retirements or vacant positions. So we did that reduction, looked for efficiencies, and that was a large part of it. But we did do some tax and fee increases. One is we put a $20 car tabs on fees. We use that to shore up our public works department and our roads and make sure that we can continue to address potholes. We also eliminated an exemption that our nonprofit hospitals had here in Tacoma on their B&O tax. And they'd had that since about 1950. Earlier in the year, when we had budget issues, we reduced part of it, and so to fill out the rest of the budget, we reduced the rest of the exemption on companies like Multicare and Franciscan, which was going to bring in about $5.5 million over the biennium.
So that's a significant chunk of change then.
Right.
What was the justification originally for that exemption?
Going back to the 50s,
before
when
your
it first,
time on the council,
long before my time on the council. A lot of it was, these are nonprofit hospitals.
Right.
So the theory is, you really want these great nonprofit, hospitals. You need hospitals in your community. You want to be able to have them.
And they're great institutions. They've got a tremendous impact, positive on the community.
Right. But the argument was made that their business model had shifted a little bit. They weren't, the vision of the nonprofit you had in the 50s with lots of people volunteering at the hospital to a much more corporate model with a much higher cash flow, much higher, they are one of our largest employment sector here in Tacoma. We rely a lot on our businesses with the B&O tax, but the nonprofits, many nonprofits are exempt, yet they still need the city services, the police, the fire. So how do we have these growing nonprofits throughout our community maintain that same level of service to them without a way of funding those services? You just look at the tax parcels in downtown Tacoma, and I think it is 49% of the tax parcels in downtown Tacoma don't pay property tax.
They're owned by not-for-profit organizations.
Not-for-profit, governmental, education,
right,
are your top three. So you look at most downtowns, it's about 20%. So right there, just and I know it's a little off B&O, but when you're looking at property tax and what we do around nonprofits, and other is that they have this great benefit of being in wonderful downtown Tacoma, right, but we don't have the cash flow to necessarily maintain it the way that we would like.
So let's look at downtown Tacoma. In the last several years, we've lost some significant private sector business tax-paying organizations. Thinking of the Russell Company, but there have been others. Is the loss of these revenues from the business taxes, is that noticeable in the budgeting process for the city?
Yes and no. It's always noticeable when any business leaves our community, you know, and that revenue that's coming in, we do have to take it out of the overall picture. Biennium budget, $398 million. That was after the cuts. B&O tax alone is $80 million a year. So even if a company's paying $1 million a year in B&O tax, $1 million is a significant number. Out of 80 million, it's 1/80th of our B&O tax. Okay. So yes, losing $1 million is noticeable, but overall it doesn't create a major shift or doesn't turn our whole model upside down when we lose one.
Are you hopeful for the future, and I'll ask you, near future or long-term future, are we going to have a recovery of the business model, of the business employment that would resolve this issue?
I think we will. You start to look at some of the national indicators. I think we just saw that property taxes in Pierce County property values in Pierce County are on their way up. You're seeing national indicators of employment up, unemployment down. So I think we're starting to see the growth. With the recession, our region was one of the last in, so we're going to respond a little bit later, but I think that'll allow us to position ourselves really well. I think long term we're doing well. If you look at Seattle, I think they've permitted something like 30,000 housing units in the last 6 months. So they're seeing tremendous growth. At some point, that begins to spill out, and so I'm hopeful for that. More long term, short term. I know we've seen. I think one of the local studies said that we had 30 new restaurants open up in the primarily downtown and 6th Avenue areas, but throughout Tacoma.
But that's not a net gain of 30 because we might have had 30 close in the same period of time.
And recently we've had ones like Chevy, the Keg, but what you're seeing is local independently owned restaurants opening and chain restaurants closing. So I would say that's a good trade. That's a good shift.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for your explanation. Tacoma City Council member, Marty Campbell.
Thank you.
Gary Brackett is the business and political manager of the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber of Commerce. And Gary, the City Council in Tacoma came up with a mix of ways of balancing their budget. What was the Chamber's reaction to that mix?
We were very supportive of many of the choices that the city made. They were necessary, they were overdue, and the City Council took some positive actions in addressing some of those imbalances. However, they did not make all the choices that we would have preferred. For instance, they were very much involved in raising the taxes on one particular industrial sector, health services, dominated by just a couple of businesses that are really the base of our economy here in our community.
And that would be Multicare and the Franciscan Health Systems.
That's correct.
And so the B&O tax, and technically the tax has always been there, but it's been excused up until now.
It has been excused in recognition of the substantial contributions to our community in substitute of government services that our healthcare institutions have provided to many in our community.
Do you think that the provision of those community services have lessened, or it was merely a case that the city funding was short and they needed to find some place to get it?
Well, it wasn't a case that the hospitals themselves were doing less in providing community services. It was simply a case that the city felt it needed to take action, tax increases in this case, to those services in order to help them balance their budget.
Do you think there's, and you've been in this business a long time, Gary, is there a long-term or a growing trend for city budget decisions to look to business as a source for needed revenue when there's a shortfall?
Well, many people would say that's exactly the reason there's a Chamber of Commerce, because it is a long-term trend. The first choice for many governments is to look to their business community as a source of funds, because they know that that's where a lot of wealth in our community is generated. It's what makes our economy go, and therefore a source.
Was it a famous bank robber who said he robs banks because that's where the money is?
Yes, and that only lasted for a while for him. It wasn't a very good career choice.
How about and city funding choices? Is it good to keep going to business to provide the funds when there is a need?
Well, I think that you will find that in many cases cities do leave the jurisdictions if it becomes onerous. Businesses will leave the jurisdictions if it becomes too onerous for themselves to continue to make a profit. If they can't make a profit, they will not stay in business. If they have to go somewhere else to make a profit, stay in business, keep their employees, that's what they'll do.
So philosophically, I would assume the Chamber is not saying that the employers as a sector shouldn't pay their share of city operations and general costs. Are you?
No, not at all. I think businesses recognize that they have responsibility. They, if you will, live there. They depend upon city services. They depend upon city streets. It's important for them that the city do their services correctly and well in support of everyone that lives in that community. The Chamber would be saying to any jurisdiction, what is the appropriate level, what is the appropriate burden you wish to place on businesses as a support, as a partner in your community.
So this wasn't the first battle. It won't be the last battle. The war has been going on for decades or maybe centuries and will continue.
Without a doubt, there are always a demand for services which require revenue, and then there is a question of who will pay for those services.
Thank you very much. Gary Brackett, Tacoma Pierce County Chamber of Commerce.
You're welcome.
Up the road from Tacoma, the city of Kent had its own budget balancing problems, and the Chamber of Commerce reluctantly agreed to work with city leaders as the first B&O tax was being designed for Kent. Business Examiner Associate Editor Breanne Coates has that story.
I can thank you for joining us and taking time to speak with us today.
My pleasure to be with you.
So we're going to talk about the B&O tax to begin with. Tell me a little bit about why the Chamber decided to cooperate with city officials when you guys kind of decided that it looked like a B&O tax was going to happen.
Philosophically, we're opposed to a B&O tax. It's an unfair tax that's based on the gross revenues that a company earns. It doesn't have anything to do with what their actual bottom line earnings are. So it's taken off the top before other expenses are incurred. But we realize that in this situation, the City Council, the Kent City Council, could in fact pass this B&O tax without any input from us. It's a councilmatic is what they call it, so they could have passed this tax at any time. So our philosophy was to initially, oppose the tax, but we felt that if we were going to get a fair tax, and the one that had the least amount of impact on the businesses, that we had to work with the council rather than just oppose it.
So how did that relationship, what did that look like when you were cooperating with them and working with them?
We had several members. The B&O tax came out of committees that were trying to improve our roads. We needed emergency road repairs and also to improve our parks, because we have several parks that are in need of emergency repairs. And those committees included members of the Kent Chamber. And from those meetings, a suggestion was made to also implement a B&O tax. And once that was suggested, then it kind of never went away, and everybody was saying, yeah, let's do a B&O tax. But it was always at first intended to improve the roads. So when we went forward with the tax, we tried to hold them to that initial thought that this was a limited tax for a limited period of time that would improve the roads. And I think as the council got into budget discussions, then they decided that they wanted the B&O tax, and there were discussions about having it for more than roads and things like that.
So now that they voted and they did pass the B&O tax to, it sounds like for now specifically to be for the roads, what is the business community's relationship with the city now, with the city council specifically?
I think it's stronger. You know, if you ask most of the people that work for the city and a majority of the members of the city council, I think they enjoyed the dialogue. We were strong advocates for the business community, but we are willing to compromise and discuss with them to reach a point that we felt was reasonably fair for all.
As a business owner yourself, how are you anticipating the B&O tax affecting you and maybe other business owners in this community?
For the businesses that are here, it's you know, it's going to affect their bottom line. Now, some of them have the ability to pass that tax on to consumers, and if they can, they will. We have some businesses that are very low margin that can, in fact, pass that tax on. You know, a lot of restaurants don't have the ability to raise their prices because they're afraid of customers going someplace else. Grocery stores sometimes have a low margin and they can't pass that on. So if we can pass it on, then it's you know, it's extra bookkeeping work for us to, you know, because we have to pay that tax to the city. If it's a business that has a low profit margin, then it could impact them where they might consider moving out of the city.
Okay. What is your opinion on the trend of government putting more burden on businesses, or, you know, looking to businesses to raise revenues right now? It seems like that's happening in more cities. And you kind of mentioned that some businesses are even thinking about leaving town. I mean, where do you see this trend going?
Well, cities are having a difficult time, and you know, we certainly as a chamber acknowledge that the city of Kent was also having a difficult time. You know, our first thought was, have they got their own house in order? Have they done enough to reduce costs? And I'm not just talking about slicing, you know, eliminating positions, but I think cities have to look to see, are they doing what they should be doing? Maybe they're doing too much. So first of all, they have to look at what the city should be doing, and then, you know, try and fund those things. Some cities have gotten away from the basics of what a city should be doing, so their funding is you know, a little you know, they're asking for too much money because they're doing things they shouldn't do. But I think they have to find a way to raise money, and I think they need to look to everybody that's within the city to contribute to that. I think they sometimes forget that businesses contribute in other ways. For example, they employ people, and those employees then spend money. There's sales tax revenue if it's done, you know, purchased within the city. So their businesses pay property taxes, and so the businesses do contribute quite a bit.
Do you think that people sometimes think that businesses are where to go to get the money? And why do you think that maybe some people have that frame of mind?
Well, I think you know, one reason it's easier to go after businesses because a lot of businesses are not voters, and the council, you know, the business owners live out of town. A lot of the employees may not be within the town, and so they're not voters, and you know, council people are politicians, and they're worried about being reelected. So you know, it's tough for them to always go back to the citizens of a city and ask for more funds. Some businesses are doing fairly well, so they are able to tap into those funds too.
So moving forward, what would you like to see happen here in Kent with the business community and the city council and that relationship, as you know, we're still in kind of a tough economic time?
Well, I think the business community, you know, has to be a participant and a contributor to the city, to the success of the city. I think the council, on the other hand, has to recognize that the businesses do provide benefits other than just a B&O tax, that they do create revenue in the form of you know, sales tax, of employing people who spend money, and they also make sizable charitable contributions within the city. So it's good for the city to have a vibrant business community.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
Kent is the 6th largest city in the state of Washington and has relatively big city funding problems. Here in DuPont, the shortages are smaller, but nonetheless significant for this town's budget. And once again, business is seen as one of the solutions for the city's funding woes. Co-host Holly Smith-Peterson talks with Mayor Michael Grayum about that part.
You have several large employers inside of your city limits. There's Intel with 1,300 jobs. There's Cal Portland, State Farm, and so on. But with all of this, the bumpiness of the budget, there's going to be changes to B&O taxes, to fees, and this is really going to affect large businesses. How are you going to keep the businesses that are there happy, as well as attract new businesses when they're going to be affected so much?
Yeah, that's a great question. Providing financial stability was one of the top priorities for me as the mayor this year. And I said we have to all come together as a community, figure out what our highest priorities are, and invest in the resources that we need. And there's no way that we could do this without a collective community conversation amongst the residents and the businesses talking about what those priorities are and making sacrifices. And there's no way that we will provide financial stability with our city without making some reductions in our services and increasing some revenue. And we've had a great community conversation about what those priorities are and where that revenue can come from. And I think we've got some good forward-looking solutions.
The B&O tax in itself is pretty interesting in that what was modeled is based on square footage rather than revenue. How did that come about?
It actually came from one of the several conversations that we had with the business community. In trying to bring everyone together, we had businesses and residents come together as a community finance committee that presented some options. I also met with several businesses. We had 3 meetings with businesses this year where I invited anyone that had a business license to come and sit down and talk about solutions. And during that conversation, business license reform and B&O reform came out of those discussions, and the square footage tax was one of the topics that we looked at.
Now, as for small businesses, they're a little bit worried about, with the square footage tax instead of a revenue tax, they have no way to make up those dollars. Will it really affect them that way?
No, well, the small businesses would be exempt from the B&O tax that is being proposed and considered by the council right now.
Well, something that's also come up with the small businesses, they're worried about fees, licensing fees. Is that going to affect them as well?
Sure, it's going to affect them, and it's going to affect them in a very positive way. And the reason is this: we have a flat licensing fee right now. Everybody pays the same. Whether you're an Intel, a State Farm, or you're a home business, everybody pays the exact same. That's not fair, it's not equitable. And so what we did is, and this was another recommendation that came out of those meetings with the business community, I said, you know, let's have a staggered approach. And ironically, as we're having these conversations, what are the business needs of the community? And they said, man, if we can get new growth, new development in here to our community and get those permits processed faster, that would be an attractive feature for us that would benefit the existing businesses here. So what we did is we established a staggered licensing fee and approach, and then we're using that revenue that comes from that to invest in expediting and streamlining our permitting, which will benefit all the businesses that are there and be more fair and equitable in the process.
I think you'd said they actually came up with the idea themselves. Okay, well, and also it's been interesting that you have involved the whole business community in this process of trying to get the budget where it should be. Development has been big in DuPont in this recession. Is that actually true, and where are you going with that?
Development is happening in DuPont, and there's many reasons for that. We're right off of I-5. We're a beautifully planned community. We have sweeping views of Puget Sound. We've got a very educated, intelligent, hardworking group of residents, and we're right across the street from Joint Base Lewis-McChord. There's lots of assets that we have. It's the place where businesses want to be and develop, and it's where smart growth can occur in our region.
So the city is really interdependent with all kinds of businesses and Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Let's talk about the tourism board that's been kind of revamped. Can you tell me about that?
And we've got a very dedicated, hardworking group of citizens that are involved at many levels. And we depend on our residents and businesses to volunteer on several boards, and tourism is one of those boards. But when I came in as mayor, I said, you know, we have to think differently. We have to look outside the box and change things up a little bit. And one of the things I noticed was missing on our tourism board was more of a regional perspective. And so we changed the membership and broadened it so that we can have more regional partners come in and participate in these conversations, so we can look outside of our city at what opportunities that we can bring to the strengths of our region.
Okay, so you've always from the beginning talked about, I hate to use quote marks, but one DuPont. What does that mean from a business standpoint?
From a business standpoint and from a residential standpoint, we have been one of the fastest growing communities. And with that, we've brought a lot of diversity, both on the residential side and on the business side. It's been exciting, it's been challenging, but now we have to come together as one community, focus on what are our priorities, and figure out how we're going to utilize the resources that we have to invest and make sure that we get the best return possible for all of our community, whether they be residents or businesses that are coming to DuPont.
And finally, I'd like to talk about the future for business in DuPont. The city has really made an effort to get a network, get a conversation going in a network of businesses. What would you like to see in DuPont? Who would benefit from partnering with the city on business ventures?
Wow, there's so many people. When you look at the way that we're planned and the way that we're zoned and the way we're going to expedite and streamline permits coming, we're open for business for anyone. We really need a grocery store. There's a high demand for that. And contrary to popular opinion, people say, well, a grocery store wouldn't fit because people can just go right across the street to the PX and the commissary. I've met with the military leaders. The residents that are here that serve in the military, about 40%, they want to go to a grocery store. They don't want to drive across to the PX in the middle of the night. You know, we would have a great opportunity for a partnership for a grocery store in DuPont. But beyond that, there's high tech, there's biotech, there's healthcare, there's anyone that can cater and partner with anything that our unique positioning with JBLM right across the street can provide for services related to our military and our veterans.
Well, Michael Grayum, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
At this point, most all of the cities have their budgets set for the next 2 years. They had no choice. The state law requires it. But it's very likely that business will again be a part of the discussion, even in the state legislature starting in January and back here in city halls throughout the coming years. We have on our website, www.businessexaminer.com/SSBR. We'll give you some links to the guests in today's program. Our thanks to Mobility Media Design for its production help on this episode. And we invite you to join us back here next week for the next edition of South Sound Business Report. Same time, same channel.